Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hello, everybody.
And we're with The Road to Retail. On our podcast, Tracy and I hope to offer tips, insights, ideas, and examples for how small, emerging, and challenger CPG, consumer packaged goods, brands can build their business. Everything from determining if you're ready to grow, where to start, how to prove it online, how to go about securing distribution at a national retailer, driving your business with the end consumer, and how to go about finding an investor if that's important to you. The bottom line is, we would love to help you be successful by highlighting the many important factors that go into establishing and growing your brand.
Bruce and I have been working in CPG commercial operations for over 30 years, working on brands of all sizes. By commercial operations, we mean sales, marketing, trade marketing, new product development, broker and distributor management, new product development, brand M&A, and financing. As a part of our show, we bring our guests that are brand founders and leaders, agencies, Amazon specialists, sales agents, contract manufacturers, retailers, and investors to discuss their experiences and share their insights with the audience.
To keep up with the show, please subscribe to the Road to Retail podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Leave us a review and consider sharing the show with a friend or colleague that may benefit from the content. You can also check out our website to learn more at www.road2retail.com and follow The Road to Retail on LinkedIn. We would love to have you along for the ride. Looking to scale or launch your supplement or skincare brand? Eagle Labs Incorporated, based in Florida, offers full-service NSF-certified contract manufacturing of capsules, tablets, powders, liquids, gummies, and lotions. All of their manufacturing takes place in the USA. From R&D and formulation to packaging and fulfillment, Eagle Labs provides scalable, high-quality production that meets FDA and NSF standards. To learn more, contact Michael Law, Chief Commercial Officer at Eagle Labs at michael.law@eaglelabsinc.com, EAGLELABSINC, Michael Law, eaglelabs.com, or text him at 203-242-6417.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Road to Retail, where we invite colleagues and friends in the CPG industry to join us for interesting topics. So I think we've got a great one today, Bruce. Why don't you introduce our guest, and it's great to see you.
Hello, Tracy. It's good to be back here on the Road to Retail. Today, we're joined by George Brown, Vice President at the great research firm AcuPoll. George is a returning guest. So, George, thank you for your time this morning, and welcome back to the show.
I loved it the last time, and I'm looking forward to this one.
All right. So as we kick off here, George, why don't you just take a little bit of time and tell the folks, your background, how you got to this current position, and then maybe just add a little bit of color about exactly what AcuPoll does and how they help brands figure out what they should be doing.
Sure. So, some people, like, they always know they wanted to be a doctor and those things. I will tell you that I started out in the 70s watching the show Bewitched. You remember that show?
Oh, yeah. Dr. Bombay. He's Tracy's doctor.
Yeah.
Well, watching that show, I wanted to be Darren Stevens. I wanted to get into advertising and brands, and I just thought it was amazing. And that's what I did. I started out in radio sales for a few years, and then started working for a division of Gray Advertising, creating national campaigns and promotions, and did that for a dozen years before I ended up at AcuPoll. So still working with brands on a slightly different level, making sure that the brands are positioned, that the innovation is meaningful to consumers. And so everything with brands from that perspective. But I will tell you one thing I learned at the ad agency that is a philosophy that AcuPoll has, is that, when you work for an ad agency, everything is accountable. Every dollar spent has to have an ROI to it, or you're not going to be doing that program again. And that's kind of what research needs to do as well. I mean, I think, everyone, the cost of research has come down with new tools for sure. It doesn't cost $500,000 to do a segmentation study. Those days are well over. I mean, there's a lot of efficient tools. But I think every company and brand has to ask themselves, is the question worth the cost of the answer?
Ooh, I like that.
That's really what it comes down to. Because if you don't need to do research, you shouldn't do it. You're only going to do it if you can't get distribution, if you can't convince somebody to carry the product, or if what you're about to do has such high risk to your sales, either to increase them or to decrease them. And so then it's worth it. But you should always have that in mind when you're getting ready to do research. So you asked, this is a long answer. My gosh, we're never going to get through this. You just asked me my background. But what AcuPoll does is help brands really solve questions, whether they're consumer-facing questions or brand questions.
Yeah, great. Love it. Well, George, we really appreciate you coming back on the show. So let's kind of jump right in and talk to us about what tactics or actions you've seen, brand founders or folks do that really ensure their success. And maybe a second part of that is, what does a brand really have to do to make sure that or to ensure to the best of their ability that they're successful with the consumer?
Well, that's a big question. And again, I don't have all the answers, but having been involved with research projects for the last 20 years, I will tell you probably the number one thing that a brand has to do to be successful is find that point of difference.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of ways to go about this. This is kind of a big topic, actually. So you can bring a new benefit to the category. So the first sort of category is change your actual product that you're offering. So let's say it's a coffee that's adding vitamins to it. You're bringing a new benefit to a category. That is certainly new and different. You can take an existing benefit and improve it. So maybe it's because you've got a better sourced quality ingredient that's going to deliver taste or something better. So it's not a new benefit. It's just you're set out to improve the category by offering a benefit better than somebody else can in some particular way. Are you guys familiar with the concept of Triz?
I'm not, but I will be as soon as you explain it.
Well, I won't go too deep into this, and I certainly don't want this to be an ad for AcuPoll in any way. But back in the 50s and 60s, the Russian scientists broke down and reverse engineered patents, and they came up with like 25 to 30 different themes or buckets that innovation takes place in. And that's not exactly applicable to the CPG world, but a lot of them are. Mm-hmm. We've also ourselves added some other things to that. And we have something called success avenues, and we basically have like 50 different areas you can mine that could lead to innovation. Thinking like time of day or a larger form. There's lots of those things. So there's a bunch of areas to mine for. Changing form like Go-Gurt, so that's totally different. So that's another way to bring innovation to be new and different. So that's changing the product itself. Another way is having no changes to the product whatsoever, but you're trying to be new and different, and that's positioning. So an example of that might be, let's say you are in the protein category, right? I don't care if it's protein shakes or bars or whatever it is. It could be a protein cereal. Let's say you decide to take advantage of GLP-1s. Maybe this same thing with no changes, you're the first to position it that this is going to help you through the side effects of GLP-1. Okay, that's totally standing out, but without having to really change your product. Maybe you're changing the packaging to elevate what's inside, even though it's the exact same thing. So one is changing the product, and one is changing perceptions or a reason for people to buy it. So that's just the start of the battle that you have. Let's say you come up with something that's new and different. Now you have to ensure that the difference is meaningful. Just because it's different doesn't mean people want it. So it has to be meaningfully different to consumers. And so whatever research you're doing needs to be able to showcase that, yes, people want to buy it, that it is new and different, and then really identify exactly where that point of difference is. So like maybe it's efficacy. So having a good way to distill down what is driving interest among this group. And maybe it's not the total sample, maybe it's key segments. So I think having the ability to dig in and ensure and identify what is coming through in the communication. And I think that's the other thing too, is you can have something that's meaningfully different, but are you optimizing the way you're communicating it in a way that people will notice and are able to easily absorb it? And so there should be some testing around that as well. So if you get through all of that, then the last thing is, can you somehow make it a little ownable for your brand? So not as easy for other people to copy. And I think that's really key, especially if you're doing positioning instead of an actual product change, then you got to protect that or everyone else is going to follow.
That's great. And so, George, one follow-up question to that is, so talk to us a little bit about how that differentiation in the product ties into driving trial. Because obviously, when you're putting your product out there, you've got to get people to try it. You got to get in their mouth or whatever that is. So how does that differentiation tie into driving trial in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing you can have is a concept that comes back in the ratings for, people want to buy it and they think it's new and different. And what you don't want is the price to be fantastic, because what they're already telling you is, I want this and I can't get it now.
Mm-hmm.
So you actually don't want you're leaving money on the table. So having that point of difference is key, because what changing people's patterns is difficult.
Yes.
I mean, they're not going to do it for no reason. So just because a category is popular, coming out with another protein bar isn't going to sell unless you've got some reason for, and first of all, a retailer's probably not going to take it unless you can bring something new to the table. So without that, now, if you're the first or the second in the category, you can probably do that. But the big thing is that without having that point of difference, then your only option, it's a Me Too product, is to compete on price. And I think that's always a very dangerous spot to be in.
Very much so. Very much so.
So George, I'm just taking a note here of what you said, because that was good. Let's talk a tiny bit. Well, one thing I just wanted to make a comment. I've always felt that it's much easier and probably smarter to market to consumer behavior versus trying to change consumer behavior. There might be something like an after sun product you would put on your body before you go to bed, although that would probably be a tough sell, because people would worry about it being greasy or messing up their bedding or this, that, or the other thing. I always say that the marketing road is full of the carcasses of brand managers that tried to change consumer behavior versus market to it. So I want to talk. Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was going to just add and reinforce that, which is, what we see today often is, the days of launching a billion-dollar, $500 million brand. That's very difficult, but finding that passionate niche that really loves the product the way it is. So a lot of new product success might not start large, but has the potential to grow large. And one example of that is we did a lot of work for this particular brand which Fairlife milk, which originally was meant for athletes. And a lot of methodologies out there just would fail because it's not broad, it looks bad. But we dig into segments and we find that, hey, this is perfect the way it is right now for these particular athletes. Now, this is before the protein craze, but it had a chance to grow large because as protein became more, as talk about protein, the education department, the job of educating consumers was taking place not from the brand's expense, but just from news and health trends and everything else. Now they were already a successful but smaller product, but could take advantage of the protein trend. And now everybody that's not an athlete wanted that. So
George, I want to dig in on one of the things you said to Tracy's prior question around benefits. Can you talk, and you touched on this a little bit around, can you own a benefit? And the famous one that always comes to mind is Volvo and safety, right? Mm-hmm. It's boxy, but it's safe, whatever those old commercials were. Can you talk to the group about the differences between a physical benefit and an emotional benefit and why they're both important yet not the same thing? I think that's really important.
Yeah, if I'm understanding your question correctly, one of, I think, the most famous examples of not a physical benefit that's different than everyone else, but more on that emotional, is Folgers coffee. And I may have mentioned this the last time I was on, I'm not sure, but Folgers was just a middling regional brand back in the 60s. And one insight that people wake up to the sounds and the aroma of coffee. Back then there were percolators and you could hear it from upstairs that literally pulled you out of bed. Now their coffee wasn't any different than anyone else's, and it doesn't necessarily smell different than everyone else's, but they were the first to take over that benefit and position themselves as owning aroma, that it literally pulls you out of bed. So that one advertising insight sent them from a regional brand to the #1 brand of coffee, and they were there for 40 years until Starbucks and everything else came along. So I think that's an example of capitalizing and brand owning that, which they have, everybody's coffee kind of smells the same. So that would be one example.
Yeah, I think what's interesting that you picked the coffee example, and I don't know if this is because of the new leadership at Starbucks, but I've noticed now their TV commercials are really romancing the whole coffee experience. There's almost no voiceover at all. It's, grinding beans and the hot water and into the cup and all the sounds. And I'm like, all right, someone gets it. That's why you pay $14 for a cup of coffee.
You're going after higher order benefits rather than tangible physical benefits. So the more you can elevate, then you're not selling coffee, you're selling an experience.
Right. And now we're going on Starbucks for one more comment. I mean, but that gets all the way back to George Schultz's vision many, many years ago of a Starbucks cafe being the third place, right? From your home is one place, your office or school is the other, and your Starbucks was your third place. I always thought that was pretty brilliant to cobble that together that way.
Yeah, and it's complicated at Starbucks. They've got a million different offerings and all of those things. So instead of trying to lure people in product specific, they elevate it. The decision to go to Starbucks is easy. You can take care of finding out what to order once you get there. So you're not trying to draw people in with product specific. It's just the overall.
All right, Tracy, take us into some concept testing discussion.
Absolutely. So George, talk to our audience a little bit about how concept testing, has evolved. But as we start that conversation, maybe give us the definition of what a concept is, because I think our audience would find that fascinating.
So this has definitely changed since I've been
Right.
working for, like I said, I've been in AcuPoll for 20 years. And, a concept test itself is based on really a 30-second ad, like a copy. Because really in the 90s and everything else, I mean, that you supported a launch with an ad campaign. So that's what you tested. Well, that's changed. I mean, hardly anybody does that. So the classic 100 words with insight, benefit, uh, the rules are gone for how you test, like present the stimuli for a concept. And really, and AcuPoll was one of the first to do this. We sometimes do a concept test just from showing packaging. I mean, really, that is now your communication vehicle. So show the packaging and maybe some bullet points is one way. Or, there's still written word, but it's much shorter than it used to be. Because if you test an idea that you're not actually going to be able to communicate all of that, then you might be getting a false positive for something that that consumers are never going to know. So you just need to be more judicious in what you put in a concept than you ever used to. But I'd say the biggest change is that, gosh, most research companies out there, they oversimplify the most complicated part of the buying process, which is purchase probability. It's not simple. And if you are doing things like system one, sort of that non-conscious measurement, I think they're overcomplicating the simple part. Did you notice? So they've got that a little bit backwards. And the reason I say they've oversimplified is there aren't just three retailers. This isn't 1990. It's the world is very, very complicated. So needing to dig into segments to find what's meaningful in that concept, to find that efficacy. Do consumers think this is going to be more effective than what they can currently get now? The retailer concerns. Will they take this product? Where's the bullseye on this? Do you need to make sure that this idea of yours that you want to test to be successful is not just do consumers want it, but will it not draw from the low tier brands? Or I'm sorry, will it draw from low tier brands if this is maybe a mid-tier, mid-priced product, but not lower or take trial from sort of the upper echelon brands? Is it not cannibalizing? So there's so many factors that each concept test really needs to be custom to answer all of these questions. Otherwise, you might get a report that says this is a good idea, but it hasn't encompassed all the things you're going to need to sell it in at retail or launch it.
Well, so one of the things there, George, if you can just go a tiny bit deeper, is, Tracy and I, when we've interviewed probably a dozen and a half, 24 retailers over our time doing the show here, and they always talk about, I don't need any more cut and paste brands, because then it gets back to your point. You're competing on price if you're not different. What kind of research or a concept test would a brand need to structure to prove to a retailer that their brand is different and will provide incrementality to a category versus just cut the same category up into one more piece of the pie? And all you've done then is overcomplicate the buyer's job, because now instead of 8 suppliers, he or she has 9, and the business isn't any bigger.
Yeah, this is a great question. I think that segments is really key. And when I say segments, I'm not talking about just, demos and things like that, age groups. You should be asking a lot of upfront questions in a concept test, any of which can be correlated to their interest in the idea. So, for example, you might ask up front, consumers, how much they agree or disagree with the following statements that sort of like, it's not very convenient for me to shop at Kroger. Whatever those different things are, you're going to ask those questions, and then we'll look at the results for the idea among that segment that agreed with that more than others. Competitive, so in other words, retailers, where do they shop most often for this product? What other brands do they buy? Asking all those questions, what that does for you, number one, is you can say to Kroger, Walmart shoppers love this. You can look at those that pay more for certain products that are more organic focused. Those kinds of buyers who tend to spend more in a store when they go in, looking at that group. So you're just trying to build a case that this is going to get people to come in and shop for this particular category at Kroger that they don't normally do. Even though they shop at Kroger, they might not buy organic shampoos there. They might get that from somewhere else, like Ulta. So there's a lot of different ways with that. Number two, digging into the actual metrics of the concept test for, is this new and different? Which is, again, going to that, how effective are current products doing X, Y, or Z in the upfront stage. Then after the concept ratings, saying how effective do you think this product would be at doing X, Y, and Z? And if they see what you're looking for is where consumers think this is going to be superior to what they can get now. Well, there's your proof that this is elevating the category. And when people want to buy it and they can't get it, they're not subject to those price concerns. So you can charge more. It can be more premium. And that's certainly what a retailer wants, because then they have an opportunity to make more.
Interesting. So let's dig in on one other thing here, George, and you touched on this up front. When Tracy and I talk to small emerging brands, even bigger brands, I think some folks are still stuck in the old orthodoxy that market research is very slow, incredibly expensive, and they'll be afraid that their category has changed before the data comes in. Can you just kind of debunk that everything doesn't take 8 months and cost $500,000 anymore, and just kind of go from there and debunk this for the folks?
Yeah, so I think you've got a couple of different, for us personally, and I'm sure other people are like this, you kind of have two speeds. AcuPoll is very big on making recommendations on what to do. So anytime you're testing 5 or 6 concepts and you really want to understand how can you optimize and make this idea better, that's going to take longer than just, here's my idea, give me the metrics. So a fast track version can be done in like less than a week, and you're going to get everything. Now, if you want to dig into segments to see who this idea is resonating among, correlate it to every upfront question, paint a picture of whether this is a viable option to move forward, and then use all of your diagnostic tools and questions you ask to make improvements and suggest improvements. That takes a little bit longer, but now you're only talking maybe another week after that. So it's really once you've got a questionnaire finalized and ready to go, it's really I'd say a week for the fast track and maybe 7 days for top lines and another 7 days for the full final report. So it's gotten much faster. Now, in terms of cost, the old days were expensive. I don't know, our concept testing can range from $2,500 to $5,000 a concept. A lot of that depends on base size. How many readable subsegments do you want? I would say if you're a brand with a 5% incidence, it's certainly going to be more on that higher end than more of a Gen Pop type study. But it's gotten much cheaper, from something I'd say by 70% cheaper than it ever used to be.
Great. So folks, what George is talking about in terms of the difference in cost, one of the key things there is who are you looking to test your concept in front of? So I'm just pulling this out of the sky. But if you're looking for mothers with young children, that's a little bit harder to recruit than just mothers in total. So how specific your population is drives the cost a little bit. George, one follow-up here. So two of the things that we talked of, brand managers and leaders of all times types and sizes, the two things that I want to make sure that you can articulate for the folks is the importance of testing your price. Because so many people just go, we're a premium brand. And all the other things you've already mentioned. Well, actually, that's not what the data says. You're just another, skin cream. And then the other thing, and this is equally important, is to test. How do you test and validate that your packaging is working? We had a guest earlier this week who's very well regarded in the industry, and he said, look, if sales are off to a really bad start, he said the first thing we look at is the packaging. So how do you validate? Because some of these entrepreneurs, their package was designed by a friend and it sold well at the farmer's market when people can interact with your box for 3 minutes. But when you're pushing your two kids down the cart at Walmart or Kroger, you're not investing that time. So can you talk about price and packaging and the importance of testing those?
Yeah. Do you remember the show Taxi
Mm-hmm.
from a long
I
time ago?
also remember, Happy Days and My Favorite Martian, George. We're going back into the
Oh my
Wayback
goodness.
Machine here.
I know I am, but it reminded me of the scene. I don't remember all the details, but Danny DeVito was having to come up with a number to ask for. He was like, $10,000. No, wait, 12,000. And he's just going by, he's just making it up. So what it reminds me of, like, when you put a product on the shelf, I mean, if you don't have good data or rationale for the price, then you are kind of guessing, and you're either leaving money on the table or you're costing yourself sales. It's one of the two. I mean, the chances you're going to get it exactly right. Now you can evolve it and move, and if things aren't moving, but still, you're missing that window of opportunity. So I think more often than not, what I see is people missing the opportunity to charge a higher price.
Interesting.
Than the opposite, because I think it's pretty easy to know that you're priced too high for what you're offering because of everyone else's price on the shelf. So I think understanding how valuable what you're offering is, or knowing that you might think you're valuable, that you're premium, and that you've got a competitive advantage. But you might find out when you're testing that consumers don't care about what what you think is important to consumers, and in their decision of which product to buy at the shelf, it really isn't the driver. So you might be over communicating something, thinking it's giving you that edge and the rationale for charging more, and it's actually not. So I just think a deep evaluation of your product itself or your concept, to understand what's driving interest and what's driving interest in the category. And this kind of dovetails with what you just said, Bruce, about packaging. Our philosophy at AcuPoll is that the days of packaging being static are long gone.
Mm-hmm.
Packaging is fluid. Now, that doesn't mean you need to change everything. It's not like you're changing uniforms for a NFL team where you have to do it every week, basically. But you need to understand packaging is not just packaging. It's really all your communication. So understanding what's driving the category today, because it's constantly shifting. I mean, everything's moving so fast. 1 minute carbs are healthy and the next minute they're gone. So like you have to understand what's driving the category. What's driving interest in new entrants in the category, small regional brands, things that are being bought online. And so understanding those things, and with your current packaging, the claims hierarchy that you're shouting, is that still in touch with what is important with consumers? And things just change. So having a good sort of audit of where the category is going, why they're going to some brands, can you then make that change simply by changing the hierarchy or adding a new claim? Looking at your distinctive brand assets, like the visuals and what you think your brand stands for. It could be that you are giving way more importance to certain things that consumers actually they recognize that. They don't actually associate it with your brand. They do more the category. Just having a better understanding of what's driving other brands, what's driving your brand through packaging is a great tool. And those types of studies, I know, Bruce, you're always asking about cost. I mean, I could do those for, you know, $18,000 to $22,000 to have a full assessment of a category, the new entrants, what's happening with yours, the positioning. So
And I think that's great, George. And before we kick it to Tracy, one of the things about packaging is, especially if you're an entrepreneurial brand and you've scrapped and scrapped and started in the garage and went to the farmer's market, and maybe now you're in a couple of, local stores, you fall in love with what got you there. We've done some work with a beer company. The beer is excellent, but the packaging is very ornate from local artists, and it looks great if it was on your wall. But when you put it in a retail environment, it's tough to read, and it's tough to know which beer flavor or type it is. And they redid one of their cans, and it is absolutely magnificent, and it is so easy to see. And the owner's like, geez, I kind of like the other cans better. I said, yeah, but what's selling more? He goes, well, that one. I said, that's because they can find it. I said, you can still love your artwork and, involve it maybe in the packaging of your 12 packs and stuff, but in terms of when those 6 packs are sitting on a shelf, people aren't going to sit there for 5 minutes and look for it. They're going to be like, oh, there it is, and go.
I'm going to answer your question, and I'm going to go back to the Soviet Union. I don't know why I'm on this kick today, but I
Because
am.
it's NHL playoffs and there's some Russian
That
guys in
must be
them.
it.
Okay.
But back in the old days of the Soviet Union, there was certainly no branding, and certain factories, I don't know which one it was, let's just say it's Factory 41. The quality of the products coming out of that factory were so much better that anything that had made by Factory 41 could sell on the internal Soviet Union black market for double what you could get from anything else. So it was just known for quality. So I'm drawing this parallel to what you're talking about with a small regional brand who was doing it in their basement, like that beer. The reputation for the quality of what's inside is sort of word of mouth. It's local, it's growing, it's getting a reputation because people are trying it and seeing that it's so much better. That's all well and good. But let's say you take that product from the Soviet Union and stick it in Finland and it just says Factory 41. Nobody's going to know what that is because they don't have the experience. That's kind of the same thing when you take these local and you're trying to now take it outside of its reputation zone, its word of mouth zone. It now has to do everything to communicate the actual experience of trying it. And that's hard to do. And that's why packaging for those brands is so critical to take on a much larger scale, because it's not going to benefit from the reputation it has from people that have tried the product. So now how do you get me to get trial in a grocery store for a product that's really only gotten it because it's so good? Well, it has to communicate all those things and it has to adhere to that. So that's the challenge of those brands.
Well, your story about Factory 41 reminds me of when Walgreens and Boots got together and they brought Boots #7 skin creams to the US. And they thought, well, this is great in the UK. And my thought was, great. So for the 6% of the population that travels to the UK, all these other people are like, what is #7? Jack Daniels? So anyway, so Tracy, take us into how we tie all the research into motivating retailers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, George, talk to our small emerging brand about what kind of research you would recommend they do so they can show this to, a retail buyer to prove, one, their concept, and two, that this is worthy of them taking the brand or product into distribution. What kind of research do you recommend they do and then show to that retailer uh, really to prove the concept?
Well, one thing I would say, I mean, a very good concept test is going to be what you need. It
Mhm.
needs to be a large enough base size. You need to use a supplier that's going to create a lot of segments to look for where that value is. It might not be apparent, but if you've got a sensitive enough instrument to look into segments, look into what's driving interest in the product, and find that efficacy, that's going to be number one. But I'd say the biggest thing is, do you have the intel ahead of time, or can you ask the retailer, okay, what would you want to see
Mm.
that would make you say, this is a product I want to put on the shelf? Because then you can set up the test to find that. And I think that's really key. I mean, I had did a product for a very, very large brand in the toilet paper business, let's say that. The amount of things that this product had to do to be considered successful, not only for the brand team, but for a retailer to take it, is incalculable. I mean, the bullseye is so narrow. Some of what I said before, it has to draw a trial from lower tier, but not draw it from certain premium brands. It has to not be cannibalistic. It's got to, so it goes on and on. So the more you know that, you'll set up the test to be able to show that. So I'd say that would probably be the most important thing. But at the end of the day, a concept test is what you're going to need with all these other little variables to be able to sell it in.
Great answer. Great answer.
So George, can you talk to us a little bit about communication and clarity of messaging? Because it's important. Tracy and I have said before that, let people not buy your product because they don't need it, but don't let them not buy it because they don't understand it. So how can you go out and, in the old days we would test taglines, et cetera, but I know it comes back at least partially to the concept test, but what other tips might you have for these small brand owners and leaders that say, hey, don't make your message too complex. Consider this.
Yeah, so I would say another thing that we do and I encourage with brands to do for a concept test is, while you're there, get the evaluation of the concept, but you should be in the diagnostics portion asking about alternative ways to say what you did in the concept. So maybe it's different ways to position it, different ways to describe the benefit, and evaluate those. Are you less or more interested when we say this? And that's going to help you optimize the communication. But let's say, I mean, you could do claims research. You could take 10, 15, 20 new claims. We have a tool, Spark, but there's lots of tools out there, and just evaluate those to see which ones are driving interest or more new and different. And those aren't expensive either. But clarity of communication is critical, because you need to understand, is it working on that sort of system one, drawing your attention? And then is it also, working to, in other words, will it put you in the cart, and will the communication then keep you in the cart in a way, like a more on reflection? Is this a good idea? So understanding how messaging works on both those levels, I think, is really key. And then looking at which target is that messaging working best for. So, yeah, I mean, the last thing you want to do is have a feature that, or an RTB that consumers don't understand. I mean, if you've got a new energy drink made from ubajara juice, well, that's great. I don't know what that is, and I don't know why I should care. So a feature with no stated benefit isn't going to do very well. So I think being very clear about what those are, and being able to say it in a word that's easily absorbed and concise and motivating is something that you should test for, because you might have the best product in the world and you might be trying to communicate that benefit, but if you're doing it in a way that's confusing, you don't have much time to do that.
Great point. Great point. So we're rounding third, right, Bruce, heading home. So
Yep.
George, talk to us about who's had the greatest influence on your career and what did they do that would make you help you pick that person?
So that's a good question. Um, so I think there's two. Well, there was a phrase I heard once. I did all the marketing for Red Lobster and Olive Garden and the Garden Restaurant. This is back at the ad agency. And the CMO at the time of Red Lobster said that uh, promotion and branding are not mutually exclusive. I thought that had a profound impact on me because just because you're doing, never ending pasta bowl as a promotion doesn't mean that shouldn't be also elevating your brand and doing those kinds of things. So I think that had an impact on not just a philosophy of mine, but the founder, he's no longer the owner of AcuPoll, but founded it, was a former P&G, Jack Gordon, had probably the biggest impact on my career. It was his company. I had three small kids at the time. I was looking to leave gray advertising. And I went in to see him and he said, I want to hire you. And I said, what would make you think I'd be successful? I've never been in research before, although certainly with brands. And he said, every job you've had has led you here. And
Mm.
it was profound, but also the way he approached concept testing and the custom nature to give someone the right answer. I don't know. He had a profound impact on both belief in me to do this, and 20 years later, I'm still here. But also taught me an awful lot about brands and brand research along the way.
That's great.
It's
Great.
it's amazing. It's amazing the things we remember years later when it's like that was really good, or why did that person invest their time with me when I did not know anything about anything?
Exactly.
But so, all right. So this is our final topic. I need to warn all people driving and with bad hearts that they need to be they need to be alert to this next question. Uh, Here we go. So George, one of the last questions we ask is who is your favorite football team, brand, or band, and why do you support them?
So sorry, you're breaking up. I can't understand the question. Um, so look, I am a long-suffering, lifetime Cincinnati Bengals fan. I went to the Super Bowl in Pontiac, Michigan in 1981 with my family. I think I have emotional attachment issues with people because of what I've suffered through. Um, because here's what's unique about the Bengals. They can lose the same game four different times. And that's new and different, by the way. Because they start out, they're down, they're not going to win. Then they come back, and then they have a slow process where they give up the lead. So anyway, the Bengals are 100%. Maybe it's Stockholm syndrome. I was my favorite team. I'm there's nothing I can do about it, but
Love
hopefully
it.
look on the bright side here this year.
I must say that I have several good friends that are Bengals fans, and I do salute your absolutely blind, illogical loyalty. So I think that if Joe Burrow could ever get an offensive line, you guys might be delivered to the promised land at some point.
Yeah.
This is the year.
Okay, so we're about to head to the big finish, but before we turn it over to Tracy, George, thank you so much for coming on the show. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to put out there where else except on the road to retail do you get a bewitched, taxi, and articulate Bengals discussion all at the same time? So, Tracy, bring it home.
And nowhere else, Bruce. The answer to that question is nowhere else. But thanks again, George, for joining us today. Thank you, audience. Please continue to follow us on LinkedIn, also on Spotify and Apple. We do post every Tuesday. So please look for this episode as well as follow us also on our new website, which is www.lifeonline.com. road, the number 2 retail. So thank you again, Bruce and George, for joining us today. We really enjoyed it.
Good luck out there, folks. Thanks, George.
You're welcome.